Hello, and welcome to my beginner's guide for Phantasy Star Online 2 New Genesis. With the game's recent Winter/Retem update coming out, I thought I'd make this guide to help new players get into the game. Throughout the video, I'll be going over many helpful tips to get through the early game, as well as explaining many of the mechanics. Though before you even get into the game, you have to pick a ship. Since people can only play with each other when on the same ship, and characters are locked to a single ship, it's a good idea to talk to any friends that already play or are interested in playing to make sure you all join the same ship. It technically is possible to change ships later, but that will require real-world money, so it's better to make sure you're all on the same ship right away. After you've picked a ship, you can get to making a character. Depending on who you are, this process might take a while because the character creator is very good. Also note that nothing in the character creator is gameplay affecting, so feel free to go wild. You'll finish off character creation by picking a class, but before I go over those, I want to cover some combat basics that'll be applicable to all classes. Every weapon has a normal attack that acts as a quick way to get a little bit of damage in, though where the real damage comes from is photon arts, which I will be calling PAs, and magic spells. PAs are special attacks unique to each weapon. They can do a lot of damage, do crowd control, help hone in on an enemy, etc, while at the cost of PP. However, normal attacks quickly regain your PP, and this helps create a system where you're always encouraged to be attacking. Spells can serve similar functions as PAs, though instead of being exclusive to a specific weapon, they're usable by a handful of weapons across a few different classes. With all that out of the way, we can start going over classes. First up is Hunter. Hunter is a very straightforward and effective class with solid melee damage output and a high HP stat. The damage output of Hunter can be increased even further, with one of the class's abilities allowing you to deal additional damage if an enemy attacks you at the start of your PA. One example of a really good PA with Hunter is the Sword's Giant Spin move, which if you play this class, you will get a lot of use out of. The other main melee class is Fighter. Fighter gives up some of Hunter's bulk in exchange for even greater DPS. They excel at pumping out consistent high damage, and while they're not the only class with a parry, the follow-ups for the Fighter's parry are very strong. They can also stay locked onto an enemy very easily, with weapons such as the Twin Daggers, which after every PA or successful parry, allow you to perform a homing dash to chase down the enemy. Ranger is focused on range. They're able to dish out damage while keeping their distance from an enemy. Ranger also has one of the most useful support skills in the game with Blight Rounds. Hit an enemy with one of these, and wherever you shoot instantly becomes a weak point that will take additional damage from all players. It's definitely a class I always appreciate having around. Gunner is the other class based around gun weapons. After doing a charged PA with this class, you can actually start building up a chain, and when you do another charged PA to use that chain, you'll get a boost. The class also has solid AoE, as well as a passive that allows for much quicker PP recovery. Force is the first class I'm talking about with access to spells, and actually completely revolves around them. Instead of focusing on PAs, Force's multitude of abilities hone in on making it an amazing class to cast spells with. Tector also has access to spells, though they play a little bit differently from Force. While not having as amazing of an ability to cast, Tector has more options for melee attacks and support. After using a spell, your melee attacks can actually gain the element of that spell. Tector can also provide a buff to other players, letting them deal more damage and take less damage, a supporting technique that is very useful. Braver can be a great threat both up close and at long range with access to both a katana and a bow. With a katana, you have 3 different PAs, one that's fast, one that has good range, and another for damage, each with 3 different levels, and they can be changed together up to 3 times. After every attack in PA, Braver can actually set up an auto guard, and if you use this to parry an enemy's attack after a PA, the next PA will continue the chain as if uninterrupted. I'm probably not explaining this the best, so here are a few examples to help you better understand how it works. Bouncer is the last class currently available, with its moveset greatly varying depending on if you pick the Jet Boots or the Soaring Blades. With Jet Boots, you can perform very powerful up-close attacks, as well as have access to magic spells. With amazing single target damage, solid crowd control, and access to magic spells and their ability to apply debuffs, this class has many strong options at its disposal. Now even if you're not entirely sure which class to pick at the start, no need to worry. You'll quickly unlock the class counter where you can freely switch classes at no charge. With that all done, I'll now talk about progressing through Chapter 1 of the story, particularly about raising your battle power, or BP. The game has a stat called BP, which is just a number that represents your total power calculated from your level and all your equipment combined. At certain points in the story, you'll be required to reach a certain BP threshold in order to progress. These parts can feel annoying at first, but there are quite a few ways to increase BP without it feeling tedious. Many of these methods are also just regular mechanics, so it will give me a good chance to explain them as well. Now the first and most obvious way to increase BP is just grinding enemies to level up. One of the best ways to do this is killing enemies in whatever most recent battle zone you unlocked, which throughout the story will be either Mount Magnus or Vanford Labs. These areas provide a greater concentration of enemies at a good level for you to gain experience points with. You can also increase the PSC burst gauge by killing enemies, and when it's full, you'll fight a large concentration of enemies for a set time. Now grinding enemies isn't the only way to increase your BP. You can also upgrade your weapons and armor. By feeding other weapons or armor into your equipment, you can level them up to increase their damage or defense. This is also the primary use of any silver or gold weapons or armor you may find, since these give a lot of experience to level up your items with. Speaking of equipment, you can actually get some really good items in the early game if you know where to look. Throughout Chapter 1 of the story, you'll only be picking up 1 and 2 star gear, but early on, you'll unlock access to the Personal Shop, a marketplace where players can buy and sell items to each other. Here you can acquire 3 and 4 star equipment a little bit earlier than intended. Just apply the filters to find the type of item you're looking for, and voila! You'll be able to find some great items to help you get through the story. For Chapter 1, you should be able to get a 3-star weapon and 4-star armor for pretty cheap, and it'll help a lot with reducing the BP grind. Also, if the filters don't work on their own, I've heard you might need to search for the exact name of the weapon or armor you're looking for, so here's a list of 3-star weapons and 4-star armor just in case. For what armor to use, a lot of higher tier armors will have extra effects on top of just raising your defense. It's definitely recommended to take these into account depending on what kind of build you're trying to run. In addition to getting better equipment and upgrading it, you can also add augments to your weapons and armor. Augments are these little capsules that will drop from enemies that when added to a piece of gear will give you some kind of stat buff, such as more HP, PP, damage dealt, ailment resistance, etc, etc. They might not seem like much at first, only increasing a stat by around 1 to 2%, however, you can equip up to 4 of them on a weapon or armor. And since you can have 1 weapon and 3 pieces of armor, this means you can have up to 16 augments buffing you at once. And believe me, they will add up. Early on during Chapter 1 of the story, I definitely recommend throwing on some of these, even some of the weaker ones. They will definitely help a little bit with the BP grind. Alongside upgrading equipment, you'll also be doing a lot of exploring the world early on. As you're doing this, you'll come across the game's many cocoons and towers, which are basically shrines from Breath of the Wild. They'll have you do a challenge such as killing enemies or platforming, and at the end, you'll be rewarded with skill points. These skill points can be used at the class counter in exchange for additional abilities for your class. Skills include passive buffs, manually activated temporary buffs, buffs to current moves, new moves, and more. It's definitely important to use all your skill points to get the most out of your class, and they can definitely make them a lot more fun to use. Speaking of classes, in addition to your main class, you also pick a subclass. Your subclass will give you access to the weapons, as well as select skills from that class. It may not make as much of a difference as if that class is your main class, but the buffs are definitely nice to have, especially if you're going for a particular build. Now everything I just described from upgrading your weapons to subclasses are all excellent ways to increase your BP. If you do all of these, you'll significantly reduce the grind to reach certain BP thresholds throughout the story. Before we finish, there are still a couple more things I want to go over, one of those being multi-weapons. You can combine 2 weapons into a multi-weapon, putting the attacks and PAs of both weapon types on the same weapon, giving you access to both sets at once. This provides a lot of customization and potential to make a weapon tailored to your tastes, and potentially even cover up a weakness a weapon type might have. There is a ton of potential with multi-weapons, and I highly encourage exploring the movesets of multiple weapons to potentially find the perfect weapon for you. The last thing I want to talk about is alpha reactors. These items are scattered across the map each day and can be sold for quite a bit of money. Their locations are randomized, so they might seem a little difficult to find at first. However, you can check out Affy on Twitter, who graciously posts their locations daily. Alpha reactors are a great way to earn the game's in-game currency, so I highly encourage collecting them alongside your dailies. Affy's Twitter will be linked in the description below. That is it for my PSO2 New Genesis Beginner's Guide. I hope you found it helpful and enjoyed watching it to the end. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. Good luck to all of you getting into the game, and have a wonderful rest of your day.